Hey, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today, we've got a very engaging conversation talking about navigating AI and regulatory complexity in 2025 and beyond. And this webinar will last about 40 minutes. We will have a Q&A at the end, assuming we have some time. So make sure you ask any questions in the comments area during the session, and we will cover as many as we can at the end of the session. So for people that don't know me, my name is Neill Brookman. I'm GM VP EMEA at MetaRouter, or MetaRouter, as my American colleagues call it. I've been with MetaRouter for 2 years, and I'm responsible for the EMEA region. And personally, I have over 20 years experience in MarTech and more recently CDP. And for anybody that doesn't know MetaRouter, we are a server-side event management platform that puts companies in control of the data they are collecting, with full control before data is sent to downstream tools like a CDP, data warehouse, ad networks, and more. And we work with a number of very large retailers, CPG companies, media, fintech, and lots of others as well. And I'm very excited to be joined by Enza from Forrester. Enza, would you like to introduce yourself?
For sure. Thank you, Neill, and thank you to everybody on the line with us today. My name is Enza Iannopollo. I'm a principal analyst at Forrester. And I spent the last, I would say, 12 years looking into the space of privacy. I have done a lot of research around the compliance best practices, around privacy regulation. The GDPR was definitely a big hit there, but then privacy has become a global trend. We have seen privacy emerging everywhere. And so I help organizations with some of the best practices for meeting compliance requirements, and also for the technology. I advise them on the technologies that are out there, not only to run the privacy program, but make sure that they run their business in a way that is privacy aligned. I also cover trust, and more recently I started to look in the space of AI compliance and governance, with, again, another wave of regulation coming around AI. It's a pleasure being here today, and thank you for having me.
Amazing. Thank you, Enza. So let's get kicked off. So we're going to start off with a recap of 2024. I'm pretty sure all of you know it's been a pretty wild year. And what we're going to do now is have a look at some specific examples. So the first one, Paramount violating subscribers' privacy. Enzo, would you like to discuss this one in more detail?
Yes, absolutely. This is around $5 million worth class action lawsuit, so significant amount there. Paramount fundamentally allegedly has collected data around the videos and programs that viewers were watching, and has passed that information forward to their third-party ecosystem, Facebook, TikTok, and so forth. Of course, doing that without having the right transparency notices, telling people what they were doing, without asking for consent where appropriate, clearly brought them in breach of a number of different privacy requirements there in the US. And so the lawsuits indeed will come to the point of understanding of if anything was done in the wrong way, and then providing people with some sort of compensation.
Amazing. Thank you for that. So secondly, we have Oracle paying $115 million data privacy lawsuit. What are your thoughts on this one, Enza?
Well, it's an astonishing amount of money, first of all, 115 million. That is a very large one. What is interesting here is that the case is that Oracle has collected data, or as part of the lawsuits, the allegation was that has collected data of online and offline activities of their users. And there they put these data as part of their own products, like Graph ID, or also as part of their data marketplace for the advertising, the marketing platforms. Now, what is interesting in this case is not only the fact that this amount of money is definitely a very large amount, but also that as part of the lawsuits, the company had to comply with a number of stricter data protection measures that the court asked them to put in place. And so we are talking about not only stopping, of course, the collection of data without appropriate communication to the users, but also agree to, I think once a year they will have to do an audit of their privacy practices. They are encouraged to go and get standards and frameworks. So show everybody that they are putting in place not only that they have to follow the rules that are applicable, but also that they are taking steps to really build a more privacy-aligned, privacy-focused business. So, and this is interesting because in some of the cases we will discuss the monetary payment, the compensation, but it's also interesting to see this combination of the fact you have to pay a compensation, but also a lot of these companies are asked to go fix what they should have fixed in the very first place. And this is an example of that.
Definitely. And I'm sure a lot of big companies are getting a little bit nervous seeing a huge fine like that. So very interesting. Thirdly, this one's a little bit small to read, but this is the Philadelphia Inquirer proposed settlement. Can you give your perspective on this one, Enza?
Yes, common theme, I would say, in the fact that, again, this is about the sharing of what people were watching with URL of videos to, Meta and the companies underneath that brand. The idea, again, is collecting data, in this case, all the videos that people were watching, without giving people any transparency notices, without asking for consent. And so that is the first kind of misstep. And then the second one is to take all that content and share it with, in this case, Meta. Again, there is regulation that require, of course, to say that you are sharing, to ask for consent where appropriate. So another case, again, of collecting data from customer for consumers and then pass that data across the value chain without really thinking about what should I do? What should the people know about this activity? Should I tell them if they are happy about it? Very basic ideas at the end of the day, if you think about it. But this is another case where these kind of safeguards weren't in place.
Definitely. And it's scary to know that this happened. And again, people need to think before they just put things into action. So the last one here is very interesting to me, but Google having to delete billions of browser records from incognito. Very interesting. What are your thoughts on this one?
It's incredible, almost the paradox, right? You have to delete a lot of data that you have collected when people thought they were incognito. And that is really the essence of the case here. The fact that Google didn't make clear to the people using their incognito browsers about the type of data that anyway Google was able to see and collect from them. So Google will have to delete this data. And also Google had to review a number of their policies. And I hear that these kind of regional policies, implementation of different measures is already work in progress. So a little bit like the Oracle case, there are a number of actions that these companies have to take to make sure that they take the right steps, that they put the right safeguards in place so that the data of people is sufficiently protected.
Excellent. Thank you for all of your comments there. So I hand over to you, Enza, for a few slides to talk through some Forrester information.
Absolutely. Thank you, Neill. So I wanted to take a moment just to reflect on the cases that we have discussed, because we have focused on the cost of compensation, the fines, the measures that these organizations are asked to put in place by the regulators. But in reality, what we are talking about here is possibly something even bigger than that. And this is, as businesses, then when we decide to take some actions, we have to think about how these actions are going to influence how people around us trust us. And this is our partners, customers, and consumers, our employees as well. And the point really there is the one around trust and the emergence of AI and generative AI that clearly represents so much opportunities for every business that is leveraging the technology. It also represents so much risks. And I think this is an important moment in time for us, the work between with technology and regulation, and we think about trust, to really take a moment to think whether we are doing all we can to make sure that not only consumers and customer and partners trust us as a single business, but if as a business we have the responsibility to ensure the society at large trust new technology like AI. And this is really the point here. I think that the way every single business operates will influence the way as a society we are ready to trust and embrace AI. And this is why this conversation is absolutely critical at this point in time. And I love this quote there because I think really represents the essence of the challenge, the opportunity that is in front of us. The next slide will move a little bit more into one of our one of our reports that really focus on trust dynamics into the B2B context. So this is business to business relationships. And I love to say that trust plays a critical role in B2B relationship. And I love this quote from the report: trust is the prime determinant of long-term business success. Now, if you want to see what is the specific benefits that we are talking about, what is the specific success that we are talking about, I have some data with me, and you can see in the next slide. So we have asked business buyers to tell us about the benefits that they experience when they engage with a company that they trust. Again, I want you to focus on the fact that this is not consumers' data. This is business buyers. This is B2B data. Now, you will also notice, I can tell you because I have the consumer data, it is pretty much aligned. And so when we have measured the relationship between a business buyer and a company that they trust, this is what they have told us. They are much more likely to recommend a company that they trust to others in the organization. And they are also more likely to continue doing business with that company. They recommend the company to friends and family, advocate really for the company. And there is something that I always love to highlight, the fact that if a business buyer trusts a business, they are also more likely to trust brands that associate with that business. And so there is a number of benefits that trust deliver to organizations that really invest in building that trust with their business buyers in this specific context. The research that we have done, and if we go to the next slide, walks you through or shows you some of the elements that we have identified are as critical levels of trust. So we went to our data science team with a list, I think, of 10 or 11 different levels that from academic research and trustworthy frameworks that were out there, we have analyzed, and we came with these 11 drivers of trust. Then we went to this data science team and we asked them to give us data-driven guidance on which of these 11 levels that we have identified were strongly correlated, directly correlated to trust. So our list became 7. So 7 levels of trust that we have then published in our research, and we use these levels to really explain and understand how trust shapes the relationship between consumers and brands, but also business to business, as the data that you see in this case. This specific chart here shows you the analysis that we did around B2B trust. And it shows you what specific levels of trust are really important to establish trust with a business. You can see their competence, consistency, dependability, accountability. Those are fundamental elements that businesses have to pay attention to if they really want to encourage their trustworthy relationship with their business buyers. And so we have also then, so this is in a B2B context. If we go one slide ahead, I want to show you what happened when we measure those same levels in the context of B2C. So this is consumers' data instead. And specifically here, we have asked consumers what they think about companies using AI. And through a number of different statements, we were able to come up with a list of the primary levels of trust for consumers. You can see their empathy, which is very surprising in many ways, but this idea of digital empathy in particular is definitely very, very key to build trust with consumers. But then there is also dependability, accountability, consistency, transparency, all these elements that are really, really important for consumers to make sure that they can trust companies and their AI projects. And there is another data point that I have with me, Neill, that I want to show, because of course, trust is more than regulation, is more than rules, but compliance, regulation, rules, good governance, they do play a very important role in the way consumers perceive an organization. And so if we move to the next slide, I have this with me. This also was part of this survey that we ran across 15 different countries, so a lot of data there. And we asked consumers in these countries to tell us, if you hear that a company was involved in a lawsuit, that they had any sort of issues with regulation, with regulators, they are part of investigations, how do you react to that sort of information? You can see here the answers. A good amount of consumers said, I will stop doing business with that company permanently. I'll ask them to delete my personal data. And we have seen this playing in real life so many times. I will advocate against the company. So I will tell friends and family not to engage with that company in the very first place. I will prefer competitors over that company. And then, this is interesting, this is a kind of effect around the supply chain, the value chain. If I am trusting less a company because they had issues with compliance, with regulation, with lawsuits, I am also less likely to trust the brands that associate with that company. Is trust playing exactly the other way around to the comments that we have made before? If a company, if a consumer, if a business buyer tend to trust a brand, they are also more likely to trust the brands that associate with that brand. If they trust a brand less, they are also more likely to trust less the other brands that associate with that. So I've always been very fascinated by the trust dynamics across the value chain. And these are some of the slides that I wanted to show you from my research, and I want to close with this one that I love, because we spent a lot of time trying to define trust, think about trust. There are so many academic papers that have been written about trust, but the essence of it is that trust is making a promise and make sure that you follow through. Make a promise and show me that you keep your word. And I think that this is probably one of the most effective way of thinking about trust. And it's also what the accountability is there for, showing that you are keeping through your commitments. What do you think, Neill?
Yeah, definitely resonates. And I definitely agree on the previous slide. I mean, it's exactly how I react, and including the trust for other organizations, because if they're willing to sort of deal with a company like that, are they the same? So I 100% agree. So yeah, very informative on sort of looking back, but let's now start to look forward. And we've got some key predictions from Forrester for 2025. So we're going to walk through each of these in more detail, but the points we have here is, first one, regulated and unregulated industries will diverge on trust. Then declining trust in big tech in North America, EU and Australia, but stability in Asia. And the last one that we'll cover is AI-powered skill intelligence and career tools will increase employees' trust in AI. So the first prediction, how are regulated and non-regulated sectors going to diverge on trust? Can you expand on this, Enza?
Yes, for sure, Neill. The prediction here is really around different behaviors between regulated and unregulated industry. Is a little bit so before we go to the prediction, there is some more data points that I think about that I think are interesting at this point. We have asked consumers, as I show you the data around the trust with AI, and we recognize that consumers today, they tend to trust more regulated verticals with AI than unregulated vertical. And so the kind of a little bit of that, the inspiration for this prediction came looking through all this data that we had, that is suggesting that the idea that companies have to comply with regulation is actually helping consumers to feel that, well, if they have to do this because regulators are watching, because there is oversight, because there is fines, kind of forces these organizations to really start to have what we call a sort of floor. Compliance is just your floor, but also means that helps this organization to really think through the competence level, the transparency level, the accountability level. So it forces organization to start embracing some of those levels that are very important to then really create trust with their business buyers and with their consumers. Unregulated vertical instead do not have the same forcing factor very often. So regulated vertical are the one that fundamentally take it on themselves in a way to show that they can be trusted, that they are accountable, that they follow best practices, that they follow standards that are recognized. And so this is also so we are expecting to see next year with more kind of AI fines and AI-related lawsuits, AI-related regulation coming. We are expecting to see this kind of divergence between trust in regulated vertical and trust in unregulated vertical to grow further. So the call there is for unregulated verticals to make to companies in unregulated verticals to make sure that they are really truthfully embracing code of conduct, best practices, really try and define the best standard that they can when it comes to the use of the technology and the data, the business data and their customers' data that they feed into the technology itself. So the prediction is that this trust will diverge more between regulated and unregulated verticals, but the call there is for companies in unregulated verticals to really try their best to embrace responsible practice when it comes to data and technology.
Very interesting. Love it. So the next prediction, increases in fines for AI misuse and third-party risks. And this is a huge one and another prediction that I really liked. So can you give us some more info on this one, Enza, as well?
Yes, this is also probably one of my favorite because it's a little bit closer to my research coverage in a way, in the sense that we have been looking at an environment we've already seen, right? In the introduction of this webinar, a lot of the lawsuits that happened in 2024, we know that there are a number of AI-related cases still open with the FTC. There are so many still open with the data protection regulators here in the EU. And also we expect to see new regulation like the EU AI Act, this new piece of regulation specific to AI here in Europe to start being enforced next year. So also one side of the story then is a lot of these fines and regulation coming around AI, around use of data in general for companies. On the other side, our data is actually suggesting that today, when it comes to high tech, we still find very healthy levels of trust. For example, in the US, trust around high tech is 45. So 45% of the respondents to the survey told us that they trust high tech. In France, for example, responded in France that 42% of them trust high tech. In Singapore, is 57%. So those are still very healthy numbers when it comes to people trusting high tech. But this also means that there is a lot of goodwill that these companies will have to protect. And we expect to see a little bit of a clash there next year, because on one side you have goodwill to protect. There are people that are believing the promises that you have made them. And if you cannot follow through, that is going to really impact in a negative manner that trust capital that these organizations have. And a little bit of this enforcement around AI, we still expect to see missteps around how companies are really managing the technology and the data in their AI projects. And also, we have experienced last year some failure of big IT providers that have stopped the world from functioning for a few days. All these events together are going to erode the goodwill that still high tech as a sector has, and we expect to see trust in big tech to actually decrease. I think in the US, the expectation is that the number is going to decrease by 10%, so a significant decrease there in trust for a big tech organization. So it's an important element to consider, also because we discuss these trust dynamics across the supply chain, across the value chain. And so it is very important to not only make sure that as a business you are running in the best possible way and you are taking care of your regulatory requirements and your ethical practices too, but also that you start really to look for the third parties that you can really trust to support you in this trust strategy.
Definitely, trust is a big one. And the last prediction, AI is definitely a tool that requires skills to get the most out of it. Can you walk us through your thoughts on AI skill intelligence, increasing employees' trust in AI?
Yes, surely. This is one that is interesting for me because I have a word of encouragement and a word of caution with this prediction. The prediction is that we are going to see a lot of AI power tools being used to upskill and reskill employees so that they can really make the most with AI. So it's almost AI power tool that are there to help companies fill the gap when it comes to the AI skills of their workforce, which is great. And I think the encouragement is indeed if there is an opportunity to use training and to use AI, in this case, power tool, to help your employees become much more familiar and much more experts around AI. This is great because we know there are a lot of best practices for governing the risks of AI. Of course, there is technology, of course, there is regulation, but it's also the ability of people to understand when a system is actually misbehaving, when an answer that they are getting is actually not that right. So human in the loop, as many people call it, is effective if people understand what they are doing. So great that we can train our workforce that way. But also remember, if you are going to use any AI powered tool for anything that has to do with employee performance, with deciding which employees are going to have access to certain benefits or even to certain training, there are a lot of rules, especially here in Europe, that will be applicable next year on these specific use cases. In the US, there is a lot of new regulation that I am aware that actually is focusing on the use of AI in the workplace. So just be mindful of the specific requirements and the ethics that is needed when you are going to use AI with your workforce. But if you take care of that, then this is definitely very powerful to make sure that employees have the right skills for AI.
Definitely makes sense. So just shifting a little bit as well. So everything that Enza's covered in the first few slides is why you need to build a foundation for trust. We call this the trust triangle, and there are 3 components to that. You've got quality, compliance, and control. And you need to make sure that you start building trust at the point of data collection and not doing that post-processing. And this is basically why MetaRouter exists and the message that we're pushing. Ensure you have data quality, compliant data, and control over data when collecting the data. And then you can be sure that all tools that are receiving the data have that full trust triangle. Is there anything you wanted to add on this point, Enza?
No, just stressing one more time those key components that you have there. I think transparency, governance, resiliency, or resiliency closely linked to dependability, consistency. Again, I see a lot of alignment with that analysis around the trust levels, really.
Cool, thank you. So this is, again, why we're pushing to move data governance upstream and enforce in transit. So make sure you're only sending events to tools where you have that explicit consent, and make sure you're only sending the data that you have permission to send. And Enza, anything on your thoughts? Are you hearing this in the market too with your conversations?
I think that at this moment, we really are spending a lot of time talking about definitely governance, and there is a lot of focus today and more understanding that when it comes to governance and risk management is something that you want to try to do upstream, as you are saying. I mean, definitely the, much earlier in the process that we were used to do in the past and historically we have done.
Excellent, thank you. So now let's have a look at some actionable steps for organizations and see some of MetaRouter and Forrester recommendations. So the first one here is embracing data governance proactively. So Enza, can you expand on this one?
Yes, absolutely. I would say I'll tell you an anecdote. Very often, I talk to clients around the generative AI and best practices, and I hear a lot of enthusiasm around fine-tuning models and making sure the models become more accurate and all of that. But I can tell you that in the great majority of this conversation, we then end up talking about data governance, and actually the fact that without robust data governance, AI and a lot of other analytics projects and a lot of things that organizations want to do cannot happen in the best way, because again, the outcome of all these very cool initiatives are closely linked to your ability as an organization to really manage data properly and have the right governance in place. So I couldn't agree with this more, as a very important for, not just hygiene, but really having a strong impact on the outcome of these initiatives.
Definitely. So secondly, enforcing consent the moment it's collected. And yeah, this is very, very important. Otherwise, you are in danger of breaching consent if you just send data and not worry about it too much. But I'd love your thoughts on this one as well, Enza.
Yes, thank you, Neill. We have discussed, right, about how being transparent with consumers, with customer, and asking for consent when it's due is a fundamental part of the equation here. And again, I dealt with privacy for so long that I am definitely a supporter of the idea that when you are collecting data from customers, from consumers, and you don't have a legitimate interest that you can strongly prove that you have a right to collect that data, you need that consent. And so there are many ways in which consent can be done in a way that doesn't only meet that does meet the compliance requirements, but also it can even improve the experience of the consumer, your customer, when it's really created in a way that is enriching that interaction. So I typically say, think about the handshake when you meet someone. That is something that you do to introduce yourself, to set the relationship in a good level. And I think consent is exactly that, is making sure that people understand if you're collecting data from them and give them the possibility to stay in control. That is so fundamental for that trust piece that we were just discussing.
Definitely. So thirdly, establishing a robust AI governance for responsible practices. And this is definitely important to do before you start to use AI. Just make sure that you have that governance. You're not sort of feeding data into AI and then you don't know it's there. So what are your thoughts on this one, Enza?
Yeah, definitely. I think this must be a priority for so many organizations. As in the second you're gonna touch AI, generative AI, in the second you are starting to really play around with these tools. We know that many organizations are, some of them actually getting AI and generative AI from vendors, from third parties that are embedding those functionality in their existing technology. You need to have that governance in place. You need to understand the risks. You need to understand the best practice for mitigating the risk and preparing that data in the best possible way for really allowing the technology to flourish.
Definitely. And lastly, foster trust through transparency and operational resilience. So transparency is always a mantra of mine. It's something I use at work all the time. I think it's very, very important. So anything you'd like to add on this one, Enza?
No, definitely, very important. Transparency is critical. I would say transparency is critical. It's also important that we put a little bit of thinking around it, though, right? That what we are going to disclose, in the way we are going to do it, which kind of expectation we have from the people that are going to receive that information from us. So my point is, transparency is important for trust, is fundamental for trust. Just we have to think about what is the best way to convey certain information, what is the best way to support people that are receiving that information. I think that is the next step to make sure that people get value out of that transparency as well.
Definitely. Thank you for that. So this is an analogy that I really like, and it works with data as well. So if you think of sort of building a housing estate or an apartment block, you have a clean water coming in. So you do all of the filtration and sedimentation, you do that once, and then you attach all of the water pipes to the properties, and then you attach all of the taps and sinks and everything into that. And you're then sure that you have clean water in every property. What you don't do is build a property and then put all of the treatment in each and every property, because you could do something wrong and then all of a sudden you've got unhealthy water in there. So if you think about that as the same with your data, if you shift left and you do all of the data cleansing, data governance, consent enforcement, you can just attach destination systems onto that clean data, and then you know that you have clean, enforced, consented data going into each and every tool, rather than just sending data and hoping that someone remembers to do the cleansing once it's in the destination system. Is there anything you wanted to add around this, Enza?
What a cool metaphor. I do like it a lot. I think that it really kind of explains the idea there, where you want to do everything that you can at the very origin, so that everything else that follows actually is clean. I would say definitely yes, and a lot of data-driven initiatives benefit from this approach. In my opinion, the only thing that I would add that with AI and generative AI in particular, we are still in a position to have to do some of that oversight at the outcome level, so after we have run through the pipe. But it's certain that if you have taken care of data at the origin, the possibility for discrimination bias, for hallucination even, definitely becomes more mitigated in the output if you have done all the work at the origin. So definitely a good metaphor, Neill. I really like it.
Thank you. Yeah, I use this all the time. It really sort of helps to understand. So that's everything from slides. We have a few minutes for Q&A. I see one question in at the moment, but if anyone else has any other questions, then please enter it into the comments and we can cover that over the next couple of minutes. But the one we have is a question for you, Enza. Just as an organization, we know everything that we need to do now has been very informative, but how do we start and where do we start? Are there any good resources that we can use to get things moving in the right direction?
Well, this is $1 million question. I would love to be able to tell you that is the recipe, go for it. But there are some things that we definitely know. I think the focus on that kind of data governance, especially on your unstructured data, assets, making sure that you actually have a good understanding about those. You have done your classification or your labeling. That is definitely very important. The quality of the data is also very important. And I think another theme that came out of this webinar, but that I see in my research all the time, being privacy, being AI, being trust, is the relationship across the value chain. Third-party relationships are critical in this moment in time to really try and make sure that we are setting the best, not only compliance, really ethical measures in place, not just for us, but for the partner ecosystem that we are part of. So I'm saying that I believe next year, third-party risk management is going to become a very important activity for companies everywhere. And I think it's crucial for us to start really thinking about vetting our third parties, making sure that they are in line with the expectation that we, the market, the regulators have. And so I think that all the efforts that we put into that third-party risk management is gonna pay off in the future.
Perfect. That's great. So I'd like to say a huge thank you to everyone that's attended. I'm pretty sure you found the session useful, and a massive thank you to Enza for your fantastic perspective on everything. So we can see some of the key takeaways here. And don't forget to read Forrester's blog post on predictions for 2025. That will be added into follow-up emails. And if you want to learn more about MetaRouter or our sort of shift left approach, then please reach out. We'd love to talk to you more about that. So once again, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you to all of you on the line. It was a pleasure.